Hey, thank you, Martha. And this is Tony Robles here at Listen and Be Heard Radio. We have another fantastic author whose book just came out. But before we talk to her, please check out our website. It is listenandbeheard.net. We have a little less than 600 subscribers. We would love to get 1,000. We want to continue to bring you authors and their stories and their powerful testimonies. If you haven't seen some of our older interviews, please be sure to check us out at listenandbeheard.net. Today we have an author who's written a memoir. It's a part memoir, part cookbook. Elizabeth Ann Besa-Quirino is a New Jersey-based award-winning journalist, food writer, cookbook author, and memoirist. She was previously a college professor and advertising creative director. Elizabeth develops recipes centered on Filipino home cooking on her website, thequirinokitchen.com. And Quirino is spelled Quirino. Elizabeth was born in the Philippines and raised in Tarlac, and that's a province on the main island of Luzon that saw significant hardship during the Japanese occupation during World War II. Her writing is inspired by stories of her mother's courage and heroism in the face of insurmountable obstacles. Elizabeth Ann Quirino, or Betty Ann Quirino, welcome to Listen and Be Heard. Every Ounce of Courage, been reading through it. Just a very riveting story, a book of one woman's resolve in the face of a traumatic time, World War II. But it is also a story of three generations of Filipino women. Let me ask you, why did you write this book?
Well, first of all, hello, Tony, and hello to the listeners of Listen and Be Heard. It's a pleasure, and I'm grateful to be on your show. Why did I write Every Ounce of Courage? Actually, it took every ounce of courage to
Yeah.
write it. It's been a story about my mother, Lulu Reyes Besa, her heroism during World War II. She bravely penetrated prison camps and saved many American and Filipino POWs. I've known this story since I was a child. Since I was a toddler, I've been hearing snippets about mommy's heroism. And it's just something that's always been there. It doesn't stand out. But the nagging feeling after she passed away and later on, in present time as a writer, the nagging feeling and the insistence of friends has always been there. Everybody asks, "Why don't you write your mother's story?" And I would just say, I'm not brave enough to write about. She had a significantly brave life, and I don't think I never thought I could do justice to the story. Now, 20 years ago, what happened was I got a phone call from a stranger. He was an American POW in the Philippines during World War II. I never heard of him. I never knew about him. And his phone call started with this sentence: "You don't know me, but your mother saved my life." Now, I'll ask you, Tony, if you get that kind of phone call in the middle of the night, how would you react? So it was mind boggling and life altering, to say the least. And I conversed with him. I had conversations in the next few years with him over the phone. And I knew that he was an authentic American POW who knew my mother. He sent letters that they wrote to each other. And I took it as a sign. It's time to write my mother's story.
And this was a POW by the name of Robert Dow, or
Yes,
Bob Dow.
Dow.
And now Bob, as a result of the PTSD and just holding all of that inside, That was a story that he needed to tell, and I understand that he wrote a memoir as well. Um, did he, in the ensuing years, did he seek out your mother, or were they able to contact each other, or how did that play out?
Well, post-war, right after the war, they wrote. There were letters. There was
Mm,
correspondence. They wrote to each other. My mother and her family were still living in the shelter with other war refugees because mommy's house in Malate, Manila had been bombed. But she was able to correspond with Robert Dow, and I got those letters. But somehow the trail stopped after a while. And so for the next 50 years after the post war, Mr. Dow kept looking for her for 50 years. All right.
mm,
And he wrote to embassies, he wrote to consuls, he wrote to ambassadors, he wrote to Philippine government officials, he wrote everywhere. But you have to remember, this was before the internet. So correspondence
yes, yeah.
through phone calls and letters only, typewritten letters, no emails yet. He was able to finally get in touch. Here's the thing. He kept looking for Lulu Reyes, which was her maiden name. But my mother got married and she became Lulu Reyes Besa.
Okay.
And she moved to the province. She moved to Tarlac. So that anyone looking for her who did not know that, and we didn't have access to the internet, of course, anyone looking for her would not have found her if you didn't know her. She led a very quiet married life, settled down, had us, my sister and me, and she was just a farmer's wife in Tarlac for a long, long time. He did not give up. Robert Dow did not give up until one day the internet became mainstream. And so he was able to email. Again, he revived his search. He started to email all newspaper editors in the Philippines. Um, Also, don't forget during martial law in the Philippines, it was pretty difficult to get in touch with media or the press or anyone
Mm.
uh, who might be able to give a lead to my mother's whereabouts. So when the internet came about in the late 80s, he finally was able to get a response from Johnny Litton, a lifestyle editor of the Philippine Star. Johnny Litton is well known in the social and society circles. And he told Robert Dow, get in touch with Nini Quezon Avancenia. She was best friends with Lulu. And Nini Quezon Avancenia was the daughter of the late Philippine President Manuel L. Quezon.
Yes, on, yeah.
Yeah, but
Oh.
that aside, Tita Nini was my godmother and my mom's best friend. So Johnny Litton told Robert Dow, Lini is the best friend of Lulu. She'll know how
So it
to
was it's like piecing together, trying to, investigate and trying to piece all these things together. You know, prior to the trauma of war and that horrific scenario, there was a time prior to that. You mentioned the house in Malate.
yeah,
You mentioned Lola Nena,
yeah, my
who
grandmother.
your grandma. Can you talk a little bit about the ancestral house? Because I know a lot of the ancestral houses during the war were destroyed, and perhaps with that the memory, and what that, just talk some about that ancestral home, and how Lulu Reyes Besa's character was built in those early years that contributed to her resolve in her mission, in the underground during World War II.
Yeah. Well, their home was on Indiana Street, Malate,
Mm,
Manila. And for those familiar with Malate, the streets were named after the United States, 50 states or 48 at that time. Malate was developed by an American developer, and at that time, during the turn of the century, it was still marshland, Malate, and was being developed. And my grandfather, Ponciano Reyes, who was a lawyer and a judge, who was married to my Lola Nena, they decided to acquire 2,500 square meters of land in the Malate area, which he foresaw as something that could bring them income, aside from the home that they will have on the compound. They built two other houses in a small apartment building. So Lolo Ponciano saw it as a lucrative second income for them, which was prophetic given what happened later on. So the Malate home was a home of happiness, family, and love. My grandmother Nena loved to entertain. She was a very good cook, and she passed on that entertainment culinary prowess to my mother. And they loved to cook together, they loved to entertain, and it became a hub of friends coming and going. Pre-war, before the war, it became a place of a welcoming place for friends and even strangers who needed a nicely cooked meal, uh, a friend to talk to, and basically it was the structure. The Malate home I saw post-war was a replica of the pre-war edifice. And what I know is that my mother loved that home so much. It was where she and her three brothers were raised by a widowed mother. It was a source of the compound was a source of income for them. It was a place where friends were always welcome. And it was also a place where she started nurturing friendships and relationships in the civic community that she didn't realize later on would be the foundation of how she was able to help uh, prisoners of war
Well, she
during
clearly
the war.
made a lot of connections, given her, status in society. Ponciano, unfortunately, perished in a it was a ship wrecked during a
Yeah,
typhoon. But he was a promising lawyer. I mean, was he a judge, or he was in a legal profession, and he had a
yes,
very promising
career. Yeah,
career. And it was apparent to me that uh, after that happened, his wife really broke down, and Lulu had to kind of grow up quick and
yeah.
kind of be the kind of like
The
the
second parent.
foundation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. My mother lost her father Ponciano when she was only 5 years old on Christmas Day.
Mm.
And my Lola Nena by then had three children under five, and she was pregnant with the fourth baby. But Lolo Ponciano died in the shipwreck of Quantico, which is, the details are still online. And he had a remarkable, magnificent career as a lawyer. He was a pensionado, sponsored by the American government. He studied law in California, and he was one of the first Filipinos allowed to practice in California. But he decided to go back home, felt that he belonged there, and was a rising star in the judiciary department branch. He was a judge. He was the first judge of Zamboanga. There are streets named after him in Zamboanga and Davao. I've not been able to visit. When he died, tragically, my mother was 5. Her brother Bobby was 3 years old, and Willie was 1 year old. And there was a baby on the way. And at that time, we still, society still did not know or identify woman's postpartum depression, which apparently my Lola Nena suffered. from aside from the grief of a widow, and my mother had to step up as a second parent, even if she was just a child herself. And I think this strengthened her character, uh, strengthened her faith, and somehow it opened up the compassion in her because she always saw other people. She saw beyond facial features of a person. She saw how a person could be a good person beyond the surface. So these were the basic elements of my mother growing up.
Yeah, and
Uh,
for our listeners that don't know, Lola in Filipino means grandmother,
Grandmother,
and
yeah,
Lolo means grandfather.
grandmother.
In many ways, this is it's a memoir, but it's also a history lesson as well, because we see the American presence in the Philippines, how deep that was, to where Americans are actually naming streets after themselves, and that's a
Yes,
whole other thing, to go to some other country and start
yeah,
doing naming rights.
exactly.
But can you address um what it was like, because I'm reading this and I'm thinking, wow, this must have really taken a while in terms of research. How long did all of this take, and what were some of the things that you did in researching it? Was it newspaper clippings? Was it microfiche in the library? I mean, how did you amass all of this information?
Uh, to be honest, it took 20 years of research
Mm,
from the time, well, actually sitting down and going through stuff. From the time Robert Dow contacted me in 1999, I began to mull over, is this a sign that I should write mom's story? And given that, like most writers, I realized if I have to write about history, historical events, then I have to have citations. I can't just keep grabbing things from the air. So it was a combination of everything. Uh, my own recollections. I went through folders and folders of family recipes. I don't know. I just felt that maybe there was a clue somewhere about stories because my mother and my grandmother in the handwritten and typewritten recipes would write handwritten sentences or notes about the recipe itself, like even the time and place and bowl and spoon that was used. And then I went through old letters, and every time I would go home to the Philippines, my home in the Philippines, I will go through boxes and boxes of old pictures, news clippings, and bring them back to me here in the States, where I will go over it again. And then I talked to family, whoever family was around to remember, because the ones who remember only the ones who are the oldest. So I had to put a fast track on that because the older some family members were getting, the less they remembered. Then reading material. I read a lot of books on World War II. Mr. Dow himself was a good source. He gave me a list of books written by American history writers, which mentioned my mom.
mm.
So every time I knew that this history writer had written about her, I would try and track down the book, purchase it from secondhand booksellers. Yes, the internet was helpful, but you can't always trust what you see. So I
Oh
would
yeah,
back it up with um secondhand sources or other resources.
yeah.
So and Mr. Dow's memoir was helpful.
Well, it was really beautiful how you say in the book that Lola Nena wrote along the margins of the recipes,
Yeah.
because we know that oftentimes some things don't actually go in the recipes, and sometimes there's certain ways that somebody had cooked something, and they wrote the recipe down, but there was an extra step or two that never made it, you know, to
Yeah.
the recipe. There's in writing, there's this idea of exposition. You have different types of exposition. You have an exposition, many types, but including an exposition of secrets and an exposition of speculation, which in reading your book, both of those forms of exposition are there because there are times in the book, for instance, during Willie's imprisonment in the war, you're just wondering, well, would this have happened? Could that have happened? What was he thinking at the time? How did you balance writing this between the exposition of secrets and the exposition of speculation in order to make a coherent to write something that would be truthful, at least as truthful as you wanted it to be?
Well, to be honest, I didn't think, that of that formula right away. This book went through many drafts. So what I did was just write it first. What I intended first was to write independent essays, independent chapters, independent from each other, or chapters that could be linked together depending on how the reader saw it. That was my plan. So I wrote essays, not really at random, but I did not write my essays chronologically the way you're reading them now. Um, I wrote them as my heart dictated, how I felt that day. A large concentration of writing was during the lockdown, during the pandemic. And like if I'm writing about Camp O'Donnell and the war and the search for Willie today, this week, uh, then that will be my focus just that week. I wouldn't think of my college life or the day my mom got very sick. I did not think of that. I just focus on one at a time.
I think somebody's doing wheelies outside on a motorcycle.
Well, I can't
uh,
I can hear it. That's okay.
yeah. You know, a lot of things on a lot of different levels. I'm still, reading this. I'm going to read it to the very, very end. And I know that there's recipes at the end that I'm definitely going to try to get into as well. This is really just a wonderful book. I was wondering if you'd care to maybe read a brief passage, if that's okay.
Yes, I'd love to. And I'd love for the listeners to hear a sample. This is from the first chapter of the book. And my first chapter is entitled I Will Never Be as Brave as My Mother. Okay, so let me know if you're ready.
I'm ready.
All right. It was around midnight then, and my kitchen and dining room were filled with the aroma of freshly baked sweetbread. I don't recall why I was baking at such a late hour, only that I had just carefully laid out a dozen fluffy buns on the dining table and was sprinkling grated queso de bola over them when the telephone rang. The sound was jarring in the quiet of the night. I wanted to let the machine take the message, but a gut feeling told me it was important. Nobody calls at such an hour unless something has happened, I thought to myself. Still, I hesitated to interrupt my baking ritual. Besides, my hands were greasy from handling the buttery rolls. But the shrill ringing was insistent. Finally, the answering machine kicked in, and an elderly male voice came over the speaker as the caller began to leave a message. Hello, my name is Robert Dow. I want to make sure I have the correct number. Are you the daughter of Lulu Reyes? If you are, I am calling to thank your mother. I nearly slipped on the kitchen floor as I dashed to pick up the phone, grabbing the handset from the wall with butter slick fingers. Hello? I said, out of breath but relieved. I caught the caller. This is Betty Ann. Yes, I am the daughter of Lulu Reyes Besa. The voice on the other end of the line, no longer amplified by a machine, was softer and tinged with an emotion I did not yet understand. Are you Lulu's daughter? She saved my life, he announced unexpectedly. I have been searching for your mother for over 50 years. With a wireless handset grip in one hand, I reached with the other into the nearby drawer for a pen and a notepad, and then sat down at the kitchen table. I found you through your mother's good friend, Nini Quezon, he explained, pronouncing the surname Quezon. I'm Robert Dow. You can call me Bob. My mother had never spoken of anyone named Robert Dow, but at the mention of my godmother, Nini Quezon Avancenia, one of her dearest longtime friends, I felt reassured this call was not some kind of prank. Your mother saved my life when I was a POW, he repeated, and I could hear a tremor of emotion in his voice. Because of her, I have had a wonderful life. He spoke slowly, but I still scribbled quickly, eager to capture each word as he began to talk about the woman I thought I knew as well as I knew myself. More than 50 years ago, Bob was Corporal Robert J. Dow, one of thousands of American prisoners of war in Japanese occupied Philippines during World War II. Like many of his fellow captured soldiers, Bob suffered miserably through inhumane conditions inside Japanese POW camps and might have succumbed to the ordeal if it were not for my mother. Do you even know the dangers she went through to save our lives? She saved so many American soldiers. I was astounded by what I was hearing. My parents were married several years after World War II ended, and they led very quiet lives in the province of Tarlac, where I was raised. They rarely talked to me and my younger sister, Isabel, about the gut wrenching atrocities my mother witnessed in Manila throughout the war. I knew Mom as a loving and nurturing person, but she had never before mentioned the American and Filipino soldiers she apparently saved. The revelations during my phone call with Bob on that night in 1999 were mind blowing. It took me days, no, years, to fully process.
Right. This is a wonderful, wonderful book.
Thank
Every
you.
Ounce of Courage by Elizabeth Ann Besa-Quirino. Um, again, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. And for people that want to um, obtain the book and learn about, some of your cooking, because I know that, you do a lot of, I think you have a website on Asian cooking. If you can give us that information as well.
Okay, for those who'd like to buy and read the book, it's available in paperback and in ebook format on Amazon and in with other online booksellers. I believe it might be available in Target physically
Okay.
in the coming months, and also on Apple Books. It will be available in the coming months. It's it's a memoir about family, food, bravery, strength, faith, and compassion. Mostly focus. I laser focus on the life of my mother, World War II heroine Lulu Reyes Besa, a Filipina civilian who was awarded the U.S. Medal of Freedom twice in 1947. And there are recipes at the end of the chapter. There are 24 classic Filipino recipes. Some date back to my grandmother and even my great grandmother, Juana. Serralier, who passed on recipes to my Lola Nena Hugo Reyes, who passed on recipes to my mother, Lulu Reyes Besa, and who of course passed on recipes to me. Even during wartime, I realized that one of the things that kept the soldiers, the POWs, Willie Reyes, my uncle, and Robert Dow alive were the memories of food at home. Robert Dow told me that one thing that made him, it gave him the will to live and to survive through all those incarcerations was the memory of his mother's spaghetti back in the States
Right,
and
right.
and a chocolate cake of his sister. And I have in the book I have dedicated my personal Elizabeth's chocolate cake recipe that's dedicated to Robert Dow.
Oh, this is beautiful. Serves 6 to 8
Yes,
with
depends on
all the ingredients. Has the procedure. There's a mocha custard filling, a chocolate fudge icing, and
yes,
directions on how to assemble the chocolate cake. You also have a sopa de
sopa
fideo,
de fideos. Yes,
fish mayonesa, mom's shrimp toast. Got a lot of just really. I'm gonna have to get into this.
try mom's shrimp toast. It's very easy and
That is great.
it's a family favorite. And even Tito Willy's beef puchero was actually one of the things. The memory of it was one of the things that also kept him alive. I remember that family story. He said the few times that he was able to talk about it, he mentioned that one of the few things that he wanted to go back to was home, and Mama Nena's beef puchero served every Sunday.
Yeah,
So,
definitely. Yeah,
food, family, mothers, these are the things that help us during the worst times and in happy times as well.
every ounce of courage, all those adjectives that you just said are packed in this book. Wonderful recipes at the end of the book. Uh, be sure to get this book. I mean, this is a wonderful memoir. Every ounce of courage: a daughter's reflections on her mother's bravery by Elizabeth Ann Besa-Quirino.
Yeah.
Again, last name Quirino spelled Quirino. And Elizabeth Ann, thank you for being with us. We
Oh,
certainly
thanks.
appreciate it. Again, this is Listen and Be Heard Radio on WPVM FM 103.7, the voice of Asheville. Do check us out online, listenandbeheard.net. Again, we're trying to get over 1,000 subscribers. Hit the button. And until then, thank you for listening. And back to Martha in the studio.